Coming up on Over a Barrel. Oh, it's Thanksgiving week. Gobble, gobble. But where are the prices heading? Well, we've got all of that and a whole lot more. Plus, a little bit of a developing news when it comes to Mexico, Canada, China, and Israel, and Lebanon, and probably the rest of the globe as well. Over a Barrel starts right now. Welcome to the program. I'm Matt McClain. He is Patrick DeHaan. He really doesn't need much of an introduction. Let's just be really honest. He's been all over the place for years. Hi, Patrick. How are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm looking forward to the end of this week. As you mentioned, there's a lot to cover today, and my goodness, some surprises as well amidst this week. But first of all, let's cover it. I mean, millions of Americans
let's get right
hitting
into
the
it.
road. Yeah, you are traveling.
Yeah,
I'm not, but I will be going. Well, no, I'm not going to be a big traveler, Matt, but backing up to gas prices, the national average keeps trying to get below the $3 a gallon mark. Every time we get close, it bounces back up a little bit. So that's where we are, but it's still going to be the cheapest Thanksgiving since 2020, Matt. Looking at your state in Kentucky, $2.80 a gallon. There's 30 states where average gas prices are below the $3 a gallon mark. 100,000 gas stations below the $3 a gallon mark as well. Before we get much further, though, remember to like, follow, subscribe. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well. If you're feeling in the Thanksgiving spirit, we'd be real thankful if you left us a review, hopefully a glowing one. You like what I did there, Matt?
I did, yes.
But getting
And
back to the pump, it's not too bad. Gas prices, I hope by the time next time we talk, they'll be below $3, Matt.
That's my hope. I've got some stations here locally at $2.86 a gallon. Yes, $2.86. And I'm like, that's not fair. But for whatever reason, I have a favorite station, and I've sent you pictures and video of documenting this week of pricing, and I still can't figure out how the road sign is not matching up to my pump price, but I don't care. I've been getting it as low as $2.30 a gallon this week. I've got 2 more full tanks to go before Friday. I'm not even kidding.
By the way, if anyone else sees what Matt just described, where the pump price does not reflect the street price, show us a photo. We'd love to see and talk about what happens, because there can be those types of discrepancies. That's why it's always important to look at what the pump says.
Yeah, because the first time I sent it to you earlier this week on my first tank this week, yes, I've gone through multiple tanks already. You're like, well, maybe it's just kind of a fluke. They're probably in the process of raising the price, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that wasn't apparently the case, because I showed up 48 hours later to fill up the tank again at that same exact station, and it's still showing like a 30-cent or more disparity per gallon versus what I paid at the tank. And yes, I did have a 10-cent discount, but that didn't justify the other 15 to 20 cents difference on I just don't know what's going on there.
The Department of Weights and Measures has entered the chat.
I'm not complaining, because I'm paying less than what it shows on the highway sign, the sign by the highway. But still, I'm just a little perplexed by that. Everybody must be really busy. But yes, my example could be your gain. Watch very carefully. Don't just pay attention to that sign out by the highway. Look at the exact pump price that you are paying, because as I have documented now twice this week, it can sometimes vary. I don't know why, though.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, too. The status quo for price changes, Matt, that moves is not the pump price. Depending on the direction, prices are going up. They have to raise the street price first to reflect a higher price. And then once everyone's done pumping gas at the lower price, then they adjust the dispenser. The thinking is if the pump or if the highway sign is a higher price and you pull in and you get a lower price, you're not going to be upset. The problem is if the street sign is lower price than the pump, then you have some really angry consumers. And that's why you generally always update the street price before the price on the pump, because you'd rather not frustrate a lot of people, especially this time of year. And that is something that's regulated by various state entities, departments of weights and measures, Department of Agriculture. There is a status process to changing those prices. But yeah, It's an interesting observation. It has happened to me on occasion too, where, in fact, on my way back from Las Vegas a month and a half ago, I got the other side of that equation. The street or the sign on the highway said 281 and the pump price said 299. I went in and said,
Wow.
okay, I'm not, what is the deal? And the cashier said, well, I have to call my manager because corporate controls the
The
pump
price.
price, but she has to key in the street price. So, needless to say, Matt, an 18-cent a gallon discrepancy. The street price, the pump price should have been 18 cents lower. I left that station and went to a different station.
All right, Patrick, did you pull out this "Do you know who I am" card? I mean, let's be honest. Did you do it?
Yet she doesn't know me, she doesn't care, and her manager still needs approval. So, Matt, before I waste all my breath on nobody who doesn't care who I am, I'm just going to go find the next deal very quickly because it was pretty clear.
That's
By the
fair.
way, this was in a price cycling market, Matt. And what happened was there was a price cycle, and she did not key in the higher price on the highway sign yet. So
Yeah.
that was the discrepancy, and thankfully, I found another station another mile up the road that was still at 281 a gallon.
All right. So let's talk about some of these other things that we've got going on here. We have, I mean, it's like almost dizzying. Usually on a holiday week, the main focus are if you're watching your local news or your favorite news network across the country, you have the traffic cams showing bright taillights in every lane, bright headlights in the opposing lane, busiest travel, blah, blah, blah of the year. And we still have that. But oh my, we have so much more. We have breaking slash developing slash over the past 24 hours the concept of tariffs,
Yep.
and that's a big deal. We also have the concept of a peace agreement between Israel and Lebanon, also potentially a big deal. Some of this sounds like it's going to impact gas and crude oil prices, and some of it may not necessarily. And something tells me the common and logic way of thinking may be reversed here from what you would normally think. Let's talk about those tariffs for a
Yeah.
moment. Of course, that's not going to impact gas prices, right?
Well, I mean, I do remember there was a campaign promise to cut energy prices in half, but tariffs would do exactly the opposite, and
Why?
they would not affect everyone evenly. Well, first of all, let's cover what it covers. First of all, impose sweeping new tariffs on Mexico and Canada. Well, Matt, if we go back to who sends us oil, the number one country for U.S. oil imports, boom. This country up to the north that we know as Canada. Canada is the number one source of imported crude oil, and so a 25% tariff, Matt, would suddenly be a bill paid by refiners. Refiners would have to pay 25% more. That's about $15 a barrel today. And that $15 a barrel would break down to about 35 cents a gallon. And refiner, just like restaurants, you go to
Well,
restaurants. Do restaurants absorb the cost of chicken
no, you
going
have to
up or the
pass it along.
price?
You have to.
Exactly.
That's
So
that's that's business 101. You don't have, I mean, you can only absorb so much before
you
you
need
financially
margin.
become
If
unstable.
you
Yeah,
don't
you
have
have to have it.
margin, you have no business. And your margin for gas stations and for oil companies is rather small right now. So the problem is if $15 a barrel tax, Matt, that's going to be paid by you and I when we fill up, and that's going to
So
come
you're
out
talking the tariff would add $15 a barrel.
roughly, yeah, at
Okay.
$15 a barrel. Let's go back to this tab.
So you're talking about a 35-cent gallon because a barrel of oil is 42 gallons, not 55. You're talking
Right.
about a 35-cent per gallon increase on just because of a tariff,
Exactly.
correct?
Yeah.
So that would then get passed on to the gasoline.
Well, let's
Uh,
let's show the breakdown here, Matt, for those
okay,
watching us.
this
If
is
you're not
interesting.
tuned
I'm going
into
to lean
YouTube,
forward on this.
if you're not tuned into YouTube watching us, the breakdown on the math is, Matt, basically right now, if you go to oilprice.com, which by the way, they track all the different types of oil. If I'm
Right.
going to click this tab, the oil that we're looking at here is Western Canadian Select right there, 57.04 a barrel. Now let's go back to sharing this tab. What did I say? 57.04 a barrel. divided by four. No,
42
sorry,
gallons.
25%. So if we multiply that by 25%, that's $14.26 per
Okay.
barrel, essentially. 14.26 divided by 42 gallons is 34 cents a gallon. So that's the rough arithmetic here. Now, this
So the
does
crude
not,
oil companies then have to pass it on to the refineries?
well, the crude oil companies, it's Canadian crude oil. So
Right.
that's, we don't know where the tariff will be. Will it be as soon as it enters the United States, or will it be remitted by the companies that are buying that Canadian crude oil? Either way, it's going to amount to about 14.26 a barrel at today's prices. That could go up because he did say 25%. So the big thing is if oil prices go up dramatically, 25% is suddenly an even bigger portion. If oil is $100, Matt, it's not $14 a barrel tariff, it's a $25 a barrel tariff. So the math does change as the price of oil changes. But right now, that you can see the breakdown 14.26 a barrel divided by, as Matt said, 42 gallons in a barrel is roughly 34 cents a gallon. Now, to pull up the map, because not every refinery processes Canadian oil. So this is a little bit tricky as well to explain. But roughly, Matt, pulling up my tweet from yesterday, Gas Buddy Guy on X, this is a several year old map of Canadian crude oil and where it goes. This is from 2019. Now,
Mm.
this map is still statistically sound because this is generally still where Canadian oil goes. What has changed is that even more than 3.6 million barrels of oil per day is now going to the US. Now it's more like 4 to 4.2. But generally speaking, these are the areas I mentioned that would be most impacted. Refineries in the Rocky Mountains, you'll see that they directly connect to Canada. The other connection is down to the US Midwest, right here. Refineries in areas of Missouri. You'll see that there's a little hook here going down to refineries in the Twin Cities region. And Matt, you'll notice a really, really dark red
I
line
see
down
that.
to Chicago. And so a lot of basically all the refineries in the Chicago area directly connect to Canadian oil. And so that's why, Matt, it would not be so much the West Coast. Look at the little arrow, not so much down to California, where they get a little bit of Canadian oil by rail, but the predominant impact is the areas that have a direct pipeline to Canada. So this is not a broad across the board 35 cents a gallon. This
No.
is a predominantly Great Lakes, Midwest, and Rocky Mountains. And Matt, the problem I've heard social media folks, of course, I'm going to talk about what they said. The one thing I've heard is that, hey, the US, we don't need Canadian oil. We are producing record amounts of oil. The problem, Matt, is that this type of oil, just like going to an auto parts store, your car and my car, well, I think they're the same. But my
You and
point
I do
here,
drive the same type of vehicle. Yes.
my point here is every different vehicle, depending on who manufactured it, it needs a different type of oil. You can't
Mhm.
just put whatever oil you want in your car. There are specifications.
Well, you
Same thing
can,
with
but it probably wouldn't
refineries.
be very good for the vehicle.
After time, it would absolutely catch up. So the same thing with refineries, Matt. The problem is this graphic, decades and decades and decades of the status quo. These areas have always had cheap and reliable access to Canadian crude oil. So guess what? Their refineries are built around cheap Canadian, reliable Canadian crude oil. These refineries can't just suddenly switch to a different type of oil overnight. So to the folks that are saying, oh, the US can produce more, the problem is the US does not produce very much heavy sour oil. We produce
Which
a
is
lot of
what
light, sweet crude
Gotcha.
oil.
And the refineries need that heavier oil.
Well, because their refineries have desulfurization units, they
Understood.
have coke delayed coking units, they have vacuum gas oil units. So they are set up to process a heavier type of oil and all of the feedstock that would trickle down. So, uh, nerd point here is the measurement of a refinery's complexity is called the Nelson Complexity Index, the NCI. That measures the versatility of a refinery, how complex it is. It can maybe gravitate towards processing more oil the more complex it is. But within reason. You can't just suddenly change the spigot overnight. So essentially, Matt, this is why these refineries in the Midwest are going to be more impacted, is because they're going to have to figure this out, or what's more likely is they're going to have to pay the tariff. And that is going to hit you and I in these areas much more than anywhere else.
So, as far as I'm seeing on this map, for those of you listening on Spotify and all the audio side, I am seeing a line when it comes to states that basically, if we're talking Midwest, for example, it looks like some of that Western Canadian crude comes all the way into Kentucky, Tennessee, as far as, refined gasoline.
Catlettsburg, you have a refinery in Catlettsburg, Kentucky. And
Yeah.
again,
And
if you
then
pull up an oil refining map, all these arrows, Matt, that you're referring to are going directly to refineries. Um,
So there are even refineries, if that is correct, then, and I have no reason to doubt otherwise, you're talking refineries even toward the Gulf Coast in Texas that receives Canadian crude. Is that an
they,
accurate?
they receive some Canadian crude down there. I mean, that's
Okay.
part of their slate. Now, the refineries in Texas tend to be more versatile and process more light sweet crude oil. You'll notice down there in the Gulf Coast, that red arrow, um, there is an offtake there, the Louisiana offshore oil port. And that's what refineries in Texas generally, before the US boom in oil production, a lot of what was refined, Matt, would come directly to the Louisiana offshore oil port. So
Interesting.
the problem is, Matt, is the status quo. The status quo is the status quo. Things have been this way for 100 years. The BP refinery in Northwest Indiana has been receiving Canadian oil since its existence in 1886. The problem is suddenly people are thinking that these refineries can throw out 140 years of operating and they can change the type of oil they refine overnight. It's not that easy.
So let me give an analogy for those of you listening right now. Let's say your favorite beverage gets bottled and they want to do a different type of lid or a different shape of bottle. It doesn't work that way. And I have some experience in this. That's why I can say this with expertise. You actually have to order new parts and new adjustments and completely retool the assembly line or the production line in order for you to be able to even swap out a different size lid or a different style of bottle. So when you stop, or labels, it's down to that minute detail. Sometimes the labeler on a bottle assembly line, if you want a full bottle wrap, where a lot of the sports packaging and stuff like that, that's what they want. You can't use the same machinery as if you're putting on a little tiny label around the middle of the bottle. It doesn't work that way. So you have to order all brand new components, shut down the assembly line and the production line, pull out all the old components, put in all brand new components. You have downtime, you have
All of
production
it.
loss
Yep.
time, you have to refine and dial in the brand new equipment. So you can't just flip the switch and say, okay, we're now back up to 100% capacity. No, no, no. That's how you get bottles and lids flying in every direction and causing injuries. No, you have to dial it in. So there's a loss of time, huge investment, hundreds of thousands of dollars just for your
Yep.
favorite bottle to be beveraged. I can only imagine what a massive oil refinery would have to pay. So there's a lot there that the general consumer may not fully understand. Not because general consumers are not intelligent, highly intelligent people. We all are, right? But it's just there's a lot, the details are what matters. And so if we don't have all the information, it's really difficult to understand why a tariff that sounds really good sounds, to some people they're thinking, no, that doesn't sound right at all. But the concept, and I'd say we're split, half the country's probably of one opinion, half's the other, because that's basically how our election went down, right? So let's say half the country is thinking this is a great idea. Wait for the details, though. That's the key. No matter which side you're on, the details of everything like this matter. And so you're talking about oil refineries, like Patrick said, that are going to have a great amount of difficulty because they just simply cannot process other types of crude. And will it make sense to financially invest in new equipment that can process a different
Yeah.
type of crude, or do you just write it out? Do you see what I'm saying? So, or is this a bargaining tactic? It's a threat that gets everybody at the negotiating table of all the different countries so that the tariffs never go into play. Could that be, a possibility as well?
Well, and first of all, comments on that. It very, very solidly could be a negotiation tactic. But because I'm an analyst, I also analyze the potentials of what Trump himself said. You can't just discount it and say it's impossible because Trump said something. Um, he may not even know the outcome. And the other thing to underscore as well, how many industries, Matt, retool? I think of car manufacturers. If they change a door, if they change a screw, if they change anything on their production line,
Yup.
they have to retool every year. They change models, they retool. That takes time. Unfortunately, oil refineries retooling is much more problematic because retooling your refinery is one thing, but you still have to find a source of oil. If it's not coming from Canada because of tariffs, where is it going to come from?
Yeah.
So, and I'd like to highlight too, Matt, I'm going to pull up an article for folks that don't know, um, you know, having the conversation, what refineries are set up to run what? And, is there a possibility that they can change? Let me share this tab
Let's
here.
take a look at it. Yeah.
So back in 2008, there was a lot of talk about BP's Whiting refinery. It invested a multi-billion-dollar investment. Matt, almost 2 million yearly man hours were put in this work. The project took 5 years. This was a more simple, Matt, modernization and expansion of using Canadian crude oil, and it took 5 years. It was done a little over a decade ago, and it was a $3.8 billion project. Essentially, what BP was after was being able to process more Canadian crude oil, not less. So, in essence, now this refinery is a behemoth set up to process like 85 to 90% of what they process is Canadian oil. It would take even more billions of dollars to
Yeah.
kind of go back the opposite direction. And so, you look at all the work on what it took. And the problem is, Matt, this refinery in Northwest Indiana is not the only refinery that has expanded how much oil it can take from Canada. So this is a very complex problem. And by the way, this is part of the reason why, Matt, every refinery in the Midwest and the Rockies processes Canadian oil. Let's look at the price of Brent crude oil. For those of us not following on YouTube, the price of Brent crude oil has generally been quite a bit higher than the price of Western Canadian Select. Now, Matt, if you're a refiner, do you want to take a higher price good and refine it? Or would you rather process and refine a crude oil that tends to be cheaper? And that's why a lot of refineries have modernized and expanded their ability to process Canadian oil, because this Western Canadian Select, which is a benchmark, this Western Canadian oil tends to be significantly cheaper. And by the way, that graphic I pulled up earlier, today, the price of West Texas Intermediate crude oil, which is light sweet crude oil, is going for roughly $69 a barrel. That
What's
price of
the
that Canadian oil was $59 a barrel.
what since okay, let me ask you this because I'm sure we've got some viewers that are thinking this and listeners that are thinking this as well. North Dakota is very close to the Canadian border. Is the oil the same type as Canada? I'm sure there are some that are thinking that. So what is the answer?
Well, I mean, it's not so simple. The Bakken, there's a lot of
Yep.
different types of gravity, and that's the thing, Matt. Is globally, we think of oil as being one price, right? But I want to draw some attention to this. We think of oil as one price and one type of viscosity of quality. Here's the problem, Matt. Here's just some of the types of oil in use across the world, and I'm still scrolling here.
You're
So
basically saying not all kinds of oil are created equally.
correct. The biggest component that determines, whether or not an oil is selected to be refined. Generally, all oil is rated API. The American Petroleum Institute has a standard, what is called gravity. So the gravity of the crude oil, Canadian oil, generally speaking, the gravity um, is rated, and lighter, sweeter crude oils are higher gravity. They're lighter, sweeter, whereas heavier oil is going to have a lower gravity. Um, And so light crude oil may have a gravity of, say, over 38 degrees API. Intermediate crude oil would be between 22 to 38 degrees API. And then the real heavy crudes are basically 22 degrees and below.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
so essentially these refineries in the Great Lakes, Matt, are probably set up to process something like an average gravity of 25 API degrees. And oil refineries overseas may be more, 30 to 35 degrees API. So suddenly when you're taking Canadian oil and it's low gravity out, you're going to need to find another low gravity oil to substitute. The problem, Matt, is the substitute. The countries that produce low gravity heavy oil, Venezuela, Iran, Russia. Are you noticing a
Yeah, that's a
common
problem.
theme here?
That's a small problem. Yeah, there are people there who don't like us in every
And
aspect of the world.
likewise, I mean,
Right.
Iran was reported to have planned or been in the planning phases of a potential assassination attempt on President-elect Trump. So that is not a relationship that I'm going to guess is going to improve anytime soon.
I'm sure they'll be happy to, work with us on oil. Yeah, no, probably not. Right.
Well,
So
they'd love to sell us oil, although they may retaliate sometime down the road. So
it's a heck of a slicing situation whenever you stop and think about all the dynamics that it takes in order to basically produce a gallon of gas that you're going to pump into your vehicle, and even inside the contiguous United States, where that oil comes from can depend upon the type of crude oil that that refinery received in order to even give you that standardized gallon of gasoline that you use well, especially me. I use gasoline left, right, and sideways, right? So, but I mean, there's a lot of contingency there. There's a lot of planning and procedures. Guess what? If they have to go through and retool all those refineries, we're also
well,
something if you haven't mentioned that you didn't mention that I will mention. I want you to stop and think about it like this. Let's just use a perfect example of a company that's like, okay, we're going to retool this refinery, right? We're going to completely have to redo everything in order to accept a different type of crude oil. Typically, companies usually use debt financing in order to do something like that. Even massive corporations, multi-billion corporations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Interest rates right now aren't exactly favorable to service debt. Guess who has to pay for all of that at the end of the day? It's the consumer who's buying the product. And it doesn't matter if it's a soda, if it's a water bottle, if it's a gallon
yep.
of gas or whatever. The end price of all of that has to come to you and me as the consumer whenever you're going and you're figuring out what you're buying. Think about it like this. How much does it cost to put actual just plain water in a bottle? Okay, not much, right? There are no ingredients. It's water. But stop and think about it like this. To buy that bottle of water, you have to pay for the bottle, you have to pay for the label, you have to pay for uh, all of the costs involved of hourly wages from people who are having to manufacture that, the transportation, fuel, the ability to get it from point A to point B in distribution, more fuel, the ability to get it from the distributor out into the convenience store, the department store, the grocery store. Guess what? More fuel, right? And then, of course, plastic bottles, which is what the majority of our liquids are in, it has a little bit of an oil aspect for manufacturing as well, if I'm not mistaken, Patrick DeHaan.
Yep.
It's Plastics are derivatives of oil. So
You have
you
the
have a
irony there, yeah. And
right.
and
So
and we
I just
haven't
want you to stop and think
even
about it.
yeah, we haven't even mentioned the trickle down, Matt. And
Yeah.
by the way, there was a question a few weeks ago that we hadn't really answered, and this really is a perfect point to answer that because um, there's been a lot of questions of all the stuff that crude oil makes because there is a trickle down. We think
A
about
lot.
gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, but if you really talk about what is made from crude oil, I mean, it's everything under the sun. Um,
Yep.
you could there's probably hundreds of different things that are all made from crude oil, and I mean, I'm just trying to, yeah, like this mega old graphic here, um, just plastics. There's so many different plastics. I mean, everything in front of me, my microphone, my keyboard, my
Yep.
webcam, my light, my
If
screen,
you're if you're
and that, and that
watching
and
the
that's just Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's just this.
If you're watching the monitor directly behind me, the foam wall, that has plastic derivatives in it as well. No, that's not a blue screen back there. That's an actual thing back there, and it's actually made portions of it made out of crude oil, which is plastic, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot there. You're absolutely right. Okay,
And
this.
by the way, I came up with a massive list
Oh
of
my goodness,
just solvents, ink, bike tires. I mean, look at everything on here. Motorcycle helmets. Um,
rubbing alcohol.
I mean,
I
everything.
had no idea about that. That one's a surprise.
And this is a list that I found online. So, I
Slacks,
mean,
I knew. Anything polyester,
right.
any clothing that's made
Toothbrushes,
from polyester. Yeah.
toothpaste.
I
Um,
did not know toothpaste.
uh, sorry, toothbrushes, not toothpaste.
Okay, toothbrushes. Yes, that I knew because
But
it's
obvious,
plastic.
yeah. So just a lot of things.
I
And you think
didn't know
about chemical
crayon.
refineries as well. So, I mean, lipstick, plastics,
It's our
makeup.
modern day world, whether we realize it or not, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And these are the smaller uses. Obviously, 142-gallon barrel, roughly half of it is
Vitamin
gasoline.
capsules.
It can vary, but a lot of the a lot of the very light products are what you'll see here. Very light
Wow.
plastics. So,
Okay.
I mean, we're talking an extreme amount of things. So you and I think about gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. I think the other ramification here is that if tariffs are signed, gas prices go up 35 cents a gallon, Matt.
But it's not just gas
That's going to
prices.
be,
It
well,
sounds like
right,
it's
the trickle
everything.
down. That's going to be inflationary. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because we don't know if Trump
Right?
is going to get to that point and he may just be talking. But if he's not just talking, this is the potential downside.
Yeah. Okay. So we're almost out of time, but I
Yeah,
promised at the very beginning of the program to bring up the other topic, which is Israel and Lebanon. Let's talk about that for just a moment. Will that bring prices down? And for those of you who are wondering what I'm talking about, they've had a peace agreement that the Israeli cabinet has
potentially.
approved, potentially, fingers crossed, right?
Yeah.
So there may be a little bit more the calmness, if you will, in at least that portion of the Middle East right now. Could that have a potential positive impact on crude oil and gas prices at this point?
Well, I mean, it's positive. Peace is always positive. But these are not areas. I mean, Hezbollah. This is not necessarily an area
Right.
that has a lot of oil production. Israel as well. So, now Iran. It's going to be interesting to see how Iran would respond. They do have some oil production. All in all, peace is positive. It's certainly not negative, but it probably wouldn't have a big impact. I think there's a lot of other things that would probably have a lot more of an impact, Matt, right now since the election is over. Things like the potential for tariffs or the potential that Trump will sign some friendly deregulation on the oil sector could be really good.
Yeah,
But
maybe it'll
kind of,
cancel out the tariff. We can hope.
yeah, I don't know if that'll quite cancel out. That the tariff's pretty big, 25%. But as we wrap up and kind of refocus here on some of what Americans are going to be experiencing over Thanksgiving, just kind of reset here. Overall, oil prices still modestly low. This week we did see oil prices go down. And by the way, we didn't even talk about really Russia and Ukraine, the ICBM, and Russia. Um, Changing its nuclear doctrine. Those are both potential risks. But as we stand here, oil prices back below the $70 a barrel mark. That's really good, Matt. For those on the road for Thanksgiving, Gas Buddy's tracking about, well, actually, right now, we just surpassed 100,000 stations below the $3 a gallon mark. And if I do a count here, we are at 30 states below $3 a gallon. So if you're out there traveling for Thanksgiving, best wishes, safe travels. A quick travel tip, of course, using the Gas Buddy app, because no matter where you are, the only golden rule is that there's not a golden rule when it comes to where those low gas prices pop
Yeah.
up. So check the Gas Buddy app. If you're crossing state boundaries, Matt and I know these boundaries really well. When you go from red to blue, there's a big difference between Illinois and Missouri, about a 50 cent a gallon difference. California and Arizona, about $1.20 a gallon if you can wait till you get into Arizona. And even New Mexico, there's about a 40 cent a gallon difference between Arizona and New Mexico. Florida, 3.11. Georgia, $2.91 if you're going between Alabama and Florida, even a wider difference of 3.11 to 2.72. So again, if you're traveling in the Northeast, there are some states, New Hampshire, Allen, check the Gas Buddy app. One cool tip that you probably didn't know is if you have the Gas Buddy app, you can actually type in your exact destination into the Gas Buddy app, and a Gas Buddy app will show you a couple different routes, but then it will also show you the cheapest gas stations along your chosen route. It's a really powerful tool. Hardly anyone knows about it. Check out the Gas Buddy app. But Matt, fire up the Gas Buddy app. We have some exciting improvements coming to the Gas Buddy app here in the next couple of months. So really excited about that. But hey,
well, you know what? I am going to fire up now the music, the ending music for Over a Barrel. That's what I'm getting ready to fire up right now.
Well, for all of you, we're really thankful to have you as loyal watchers and listeners. We really appreciate your continued support. Shoot us an email if you have a comment or a holiday gas price that seems a little out of the norm. Podcast at Gas Buddy is where you'll find us. Matt is Over a Barrel Matt, and I'm Gas Buddy Guy and X. We're all over the place. We'd love to hear from you guys on what you're seeing this holiday season. But Matt, to you and yours, happy Thanksgiving. To you and all of our listeners and followers, we really appreciate it.
You as well. Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you for watching and listening here on Over a Barrel. We will talk again coming up next week.